Who the hell are you?
So, like full name kind of deal, or
Yeah.
like Ryan? So Ryan Hanley.
Yeah.
So I've been in the natural resources space for 15 years now, across manufacturing for oil and gas, and now equipment like OEM designing of mining equipment and oil and gas as well, if you count oil sands.
Sexy.
Yeah. So pretty much just the mineral exploration and like the mineral extraction side of the natural resources industry.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to talk about some mining stuff.
Yeah, we are. Oh, so language is a thing.
No, you can swear.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, our other friend, whose name I cannot mention.
Oh yeah, he swears.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, that is not age. That is, yeah.
Yeah, how's that work? So you can't show his name, so that you just like fuzz out the face, kind of like like if you're like interviewing like a special agent kind of deal.
Yeah.
Actually?
I have to change his voice too, and I have him all the lighting for him is super dark, so you can like barely see him, and then he'll just have like a double layer.
That's hilarious.
Fuzz. Yeah.
So you actually he should be able to talk about anything. There should be nothing off the table if he's fuzzed out.
He did not hold back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah, no, it was good.
I'm gonna comment on that video. Hey, so and so.
Oh my god. Yeah. Just absolutely blow his cover.
Yeah.
That'll go well. Let me know how. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let me know. Well, I'll be there for the fallout. I'm sure.
I'm sure
Get
I will
sued
be
on
too.
my second episode.
Yeah.
Sick. All right, man. Let's talk about the tariffs, because that's obviously a segue from our first episode podcast. And Trump keeps messing around with those. And so how do they affect the mining industry in Canada?
Oh man, I mean, there's always been tariffs on the mining industry in Canada. If you go back to I don't know, about 10 years ago, there's tariffs imposed by the United States on our steel and aluminum, right? So Canada's the number one exporter of aluminum in the world. So even going back that far, it's like we've always had tariffs imposed on us, right? But we have to try and think about like what's the reason that the tariffs are imposed. Tariffs are going to be on actual manufactured goods rather than the raw commodity itself. Steel is a great example though, because the steel industry across Canada, steel industry period it's oversaturated. You can get it done in Brazil in terms of like iron ore mining way cheaper and at way higher tonnage, right? So it's easy to tariff Canada, and it's not a significant impact to the United States as well. It just helps level the playing field. So if they're looking for like local iron ore or raw commodity, it'll force them to invest heavily into their local infrastructure, right?
Okay.
I mean, it's easier to think about that from the sake of like manufacturing. So whenever the tariff gets put in place, it's to normalize, right? It's to make it it's to remove the benefit that another country has of whether they make something more efficiently or just cheaper, like in the case of China, right?
Yeah.
And so as soon as you start to normalize that price, you immediately, for your local producers or your local manufacturers, you level the playing field, and it gives them a better chance at having investment internally. Right. And then the more investment you have, obviously, you can start to either have, I mean, like Economy 101, you can start to either have a cheaper way of doing it because you're investing more, so you become more productive, right? And if all else fails, at least you're producing it on par.
Right.
So right now we have proposed tariffs on things like our energy or our oil and gas, right? And I mean, that one seems pretty simple, although they haven't come out and said the reason. You just think about that, and you think about the energy sector the last time Trump was in power in particular. And they were energy independent. They were producing enough oil where they didn't need to import it anymore, right? Okay. And so the U.S. is our number one importer of oil. Or rather, another way to say that is Canada's number one customer for oil is the United States.
Right.
And so you've got this infrastructure that's been set up, and you've got these pipelines that are in place, and you've got these rail lines that are all set up to be bringing in our oil, right? And it's really cost effective to do so. It's cost effective because they're our largest customer. So when the barrel of oil was at $130 way back when, they'd import it at a 20 to 30% discount, right, to what the actual barrel of oil was at.
Right.
And we'd say thank you. Because it was our largest and really our only customer.
Yeah.
Which is the argument for why we need to have pipelines to both coastal waters, right? So we can hit the European market with oil and natural gas, and also the Asian market, right? Or even Australian for that matter. But so then the U.S. has to either become very efficient at making their oil, which is where fracking really took over back in Trump's last power, or they have to normalize it by tariffing it, right? And they're talking a 10 to 15% tariff right now on our Canadian energy.
Okay.
But if you look at the number one commodities that Canada produces are copper and gold. We're the largest exporter of gold in the world.
Nice.
Yeah. So and potash will be the next one. But when you look at those commodities, to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been any proposed tariffs on those at the moment. It's more of a terror tactic or a bargaining tactic by tariffing our oil, because we don't have our other markets that we can effectively sell that in.
Yeah.
And it's one of the largest revenue streams that our country has. Right. So it's really like putting us in a vice and squeezing us if we can't sell to the United States.
Right. But also hopefully it's incentivizing us to be able to figure out how to get our raw materials exported to other countries and
100%.
therefore make more money and increase our GDP, which would be super nice.
Could be nice.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's one purpose of the tariffs. Another purpose of the tariffs could really be to try and strangle us in terms of foreign investment coming in.
Right.
Now, for this trade war in particular, in that case, we're fortunate that our own government has made foreign investment very difficult. So it's not necessarily one of the issues we have this time around, but it is a valid argument as well. So whenever policy in the country makes it difficult to develop new resources, or they impose something like a carbon tax in the case that we're experiencing right now, then we start to lose foreign investment, period. Right.
Yeah.
And if we talk about oil and gas, we saw that when Royal Dutch Shell pulled out of our oil sands 5 years ago and sold off all their assets except for the refineries that they have in place. Right. But the mining side of it, where they're actually like producing and extracting the oil, they sold those all off, and it was only internal Canadian companies that were interested in buying it. Right. So if you look at the consolidation of our oil sands, and we'll talk about other commodities later as well, but the consolidation of our oil sands is such that we've got a few foreign investors, mostly Chinese, and then the rest are all the majors are all Canadian companies now, right? Because there is a lot of uncertainty in our market, and our ability to produce our commodities cost effectively,
right,
and to be able to expand that. Permitting takes forever. It's funny. So again, I was trying to look it up this morning and see if anything had changed, because like daily this stuff is changing, right? But I'm not seeing any clear indication of tariffs being placed against like our copper, our gold. We're not a significant producer of lithium yet, but there's a couple of projects that are in the pipeline right now. Same with potash. Like I don't see, so like if I'm just thinking, I mean, remove potash for a sec, but if you think critical minerals, rare earth battery metals would be a part of that as well. I don't see any clear indication of where they're going to be tariffing us. They've taken a more proactive strategy in terms of like they're investing in their own development of those commodities rather than tariffing ours. And so it really just like begs the question, like if they're able to do it, are they able to do it cost effectively and don't have to put a tariff, or are they going to tariff us to try and balance the playing field?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you do the same thing with like China, for example.
For sure. I think the issue with the states doing it to us is just the closeness that we've had for so many years. Mm-hmm. And it's like we rely on them, they rely on us. So why create bad blood with your neighbor, you know? That's a little bit frustrating. Like I understand like from their point of view why they would do it, but
it'll be interesting to see the end game.
Yeah, it will be.
Yeah. I don't know if we talked about it. There was I was listening to a different pod, and they were talking about like when you go into a car store, right, or like a car dealership, and you want to buy a car, so you start to negotiate with the manager or the salesperson that you're negotiating with, right? They have a bottom. They know what they're willing to accept, but that's not what they're going to lead with.
No, of course not.
Right? They're going to lead high, and they're going to keep you in the dark about their negotiations. Like what are the levers they have to pull? Extended warranty, free tire storage, cost. You know what I mean? Like they've got all these levers that they can pull, and they're not going to tell you what those levers are, and they're not going to tell you how they want to get to their end game or what it is. And we accept that when it's a negotiation of that sort, yeah, right? Because it doesn't have a dramatic effect on our day-to-day lives like a tariff does.
Right.
And so when you look at how he's negotiating, one could argue that it's just like genuinely a negotiation tactic, but does it spread like a ton of fear to all of us during the time? For sure it does. I mean, luckily he's kicked that can down the road twice now.
Yeah, but it feels like one day that can's going to stop being kicked.
100%.
Yeah, and
100%.
then what happens, right?
Yeah, well, we'll see.
They were talking about like auto plants shutting down within weeks of.
Yeah,
of
Magna's
tariffs.
already selling auto plants.
Are they?
Yeah, they're selling off. No, they're doing it the other way. They're selling off auto plants in the States.
Oh, so they're trying to retain Canadian.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah,
that's
which would be great.
yeah, good for them.
Yeah.
That's actually nice to hear.
Yeah, Canadian family-owned company.
Right.
Massive.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, very cool. I mean, like, one of the guys that works for me, he was telling me his wife's in the finance department for Magna. Mm-hmm. So this is obviously how I came across this, but he was saying that when Magna's building a vehicle, it'll cross the border 6 times before it's done being manufactured.
Yeah.
Right? This one puts doors on, that one mounts the engine, this one does the paint, this one does, and so it'll cross minimum 6, on average 6 times.
Yeah. And
when do you tariff it each time?
Well, yeah, they would. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what the plan would be.
I know.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, he's pulled back on the auto tariffs as well, right?
Yeah.
Once you realize how that works.
Like he would just destroy the economy like that. Like we'd have Hamilton, Oshawa, Alliston, all 3 of those cities would just they'd be over, like overnight gone.
Burlington,
yeah,
all the Ford dealerships there.
Yep.
Or manufacturing plants there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be brutal.
Okay. So then let's talk about some commodities then, so we can, instead of the finalized products, like discuss on different commodities, current prices and trends, such as gold, copper.
Yeah, commodity prices are all skyrocketing.
Yeah.
Copper, we're at all-time highs. Gold is at an all-time high. We crossed and have maintained over $3,000 for a couple weeks now. Right? That's absurd.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because of the fears of the economic uncertainty, Canadian's dollar sliding?
Yeah, so we don't follow the Canadian dollar on commodity prices, right? Those are global indexes.
Oh, right.
Arguably, it's all supply and demand, and the index is tracking the availability of it versus the want for it. So whenever you have economic uncertainty, it started rising during COVID. It continued to rise. So talking gold strictly, started rising during COVID for obvious economic uncertain reasons, right? It continued to rise after COVID because of all the inflation we were having. And now we've got global trade wars that are happening. Yeah. So commodities, gold in particular, are a store of value.
Yeah, the gold standard, basically.
Yeah, which is gone. But it is. It's a store of value. So you've got countries like Russia and China who have been buying absurd amounts of gold throughout this entire thing. The U.S. is rumored to be restocking up their gold stores as well, because at the end of the day, if you can back your currency with something that's tangible and has that's considered a global store of value, you can get some a plateau to how low will it go.
Right.
It's backed up with something tangible. Then you start looking at things like copper. Copper's skyrocketing. It's skyrocketing though because of the green transition, right?
Oh, yeah, because electric cars, electric anything is copper.
Yeah, electric anything is copper.
Right.
Lithium. Surprisingly though, lithium's one of the commodities that are in those essential minerals, essential metals. That it's at all-time lows right now. So that's a really interesting thing. So trade wars happen in different ways, right? And I mean, I know we were just touching on the U.S. there, but if we just dabble into China, China's the number 1 purchaser of gold in the world, right? They're the number 1 producer of lithium in the world.
Right.
And so what China's done to stop and to make it uneconomical to produce new mines globally is they flooded the market with lithium.
Oh, so that they don't. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So it's obviously cost them nothing to produce it.
Yeah.
And arguably, not arguably, all companies have ownership by the Chinese government, right? And they heavily subsidize the exploration of metals and minerals, as well as the development of them. And so they're able to control the market and make sure that the manufacturing of batteries and all those things stay there, because that's where it's easiest to get the commodity. And if you want to buy it from them, sure, they'll sell it to you at a market rate, right? But it actually protects their manufacturing industry as well. So they've completely oversaturated the world's lithium supply and drove the price way down. So mega projects in the United States are no longer viable to go.
Right.
They're only viable because companies like Ford, companies like GM have invested hundreds of millions of dollars for the first time ever into actual mining companies.
Yeah, that was interesting when you were telling me about that. That's cool.
So you look at like Thacker Pass, or you look at like Rhyolite Ridge, and they have hundreds of millions from automakers.
So what were they doing before that? You said that they would basically try to secure a price on the commodity negotiate a price so that even if it went up, they'd still get a base price. But now they're actually taking money and investing into ownership of the mines.
Yeah, so now we're talking about like financial models for how do you develop a mine, right? So aside from traditional lending, which would be like you go to the bank with your business plan, you borrow a couple $100 million, or you go to private equity and you borrow that, which are more traditional lending styles.
Yeah.
In the mining industry, you also have what's called an offtake agreement. So you are selling future gold or future lithium during the production of your mine. You're guaranteeing a certain percentage of that at the price that's negotiated at the time, regardless of whether the commodity price goes up or down.
Yeah.
Within like a bandwidth, you've guaranteed that they'll get it at that price.
Right.
And so the companies that do that type of work, like a Wheaton Precious Metals, for example, they have an extreme understanding of the commodities market, and they're banking on that going up so that they'll be buying it. They're middlemen. They'll be buying at a discounted price in the future, and then they don't do anything with it. They sell it off to people who are going to use it to actually make something.
Okay.
Right. So they're streamers. They're literally just a middleman.
Right.
Right. Like a food broker.
Yeah,
Before the grocery
they're brokering the transaction, grabbing the
100%.
the uptake on it,
and they'll. I mean, it's at an extreme amount in terms of the percentage interest that they earn, and it's also like at the detriment to like future sales as well, right? Because you're guaranteeing a certain percentage of your offtake or of your production at what will be a discounted price.
Right.
Right. So those would be the two primary ways of doing that.
Okay.
And now we're starting to see that external investment as well. So if we speak about Canada, you look at new mines that'll be starting up this year, like Foran has a property in Saskatchewan. It's a copper mine. It's a really small copper mine, but it's called McKelvin Bay, and they had the Ontario Teachers Plan, or pension plan. They actually invested a couple $100 million in them 2 years ago.
Oh wow!
Right, which would have been one of the first cases of the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan investing directly into a commodity.
Right.
We've got a lithium mine in Northern Ontario. It's relatively small, but we see Mitsubishi has just invested into them. Right?
Oh, okay.
And Mitsubishi is one of those Japanese companies that is huge. It's a company back from feudal Japan, so they're absolutely massive, and they have their fingers in everything. We know them for vehicles, we know them for electronics, but they're in literally every space of every market in the world. And so now you've like windmills, for example, they're massive in the windmill sector. They make large electric motors, right? And so now they're going to be securing their investment into the lithium industry too.
Okay.
Right, in terms of having the ownership on the mining side.
Yeah, it's smart. It's very clever.
It's really clever.
Yeah.
It's
not only do you get your commodity, but you also get the financial
benefit of
gains. Yeah, that's clever.
Yeah, it's smart. It's in certain cases, especially with streamers, there is a downside to it. It's expensive, and those streamers with the offtake agreements, they always want to be first position. And they're always the highest risk profile investor, so they get in there months, sometimes years before a bank will consider it.
Okay.
Right, so they'll help fund the development of it all or the exploration of it all, right? So by the time the banks come around, it's a much more difficult deal to actually partake in because the streamer is always number one position for financing.
Right, so the banks would actually be going in second behind.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Man, it's completely, it's so similar and so completely different than the mortgage space. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
I didn't realize there was still a first, second position.
Big time.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, big time. And like globally, the number of banks who used to do like large mining transactions have significantly reduced, like more than halved since COVID.
Why?
Mining has a terrible return. Okay. It's a high risk profile, and your return is over such a long time horizon.
Right. Yeah,
that they just don't want to play in it.
Yeah.
You can go and invest in something in Silicon Valley and have a much quicker return. I mean, look at like Facebook or Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Or
how many companies are popping up that just come and go instantaneously? It's still, I feel like that's still a high risk.
It is lower dollar value, so now you can diversify over many more companies within a sector.
Right.
And then the return is much longer.
So what does it cost to open a mine? Speaking of dollar value,
there's a. I won't mention names in case we get into the complications of what they did, but there's a mine that opened up in Northern Ontario. It's about 10,000 tons per day of rock moved at originally published at like 1.2 grams per gold per ton. And the original budget for that, forecasted budget, was $500 million. Now they built during COVID, but their overages weren't related to that at all. Maybe call it maybe like 15% would have been related to that. But at the end of construction, it cost them $1 billion to build that.
Holy shit.
Yeah, for 10,000 tons a day. All right. I mean, and again, they're only pulling 1.2 grams per ton out of it. Right. So it's not a lot. I mean, that's another really good example if we're talking about mining risk. This is a junior, so they're a single asset owner. It's the only mine they have,
right? And
they didn't have anything as they were building it, right? So high risk as well. And so from all the research they'd done and all the companies that had come on board and signed off saying it was true, because there's a really large process that's the law in Canada if you want to be listed on the TSX in order to be able to go out and verify what you have in the ground before you can ask for money.
Right, that makes sense.
Makes sense.
How as a consumer am I going to know there's gold there? Anybody.
How did any of them?
Yeah.
Right? Which is actually why the TSX is the number one investment platform for mining in the world.
Okay.
Right? Because we do have these regulations in place that give certainty to the investors.
Right.
In this case, though, that company ended up losing, oh my gosh, the majority of their value because of a few of the things that. So number one, you had the overages, and then they had to dilute their shares to raise more money to finish construction.
Right.
But then you also have instead of 1.2 grams per ton on average for the first 5 years, they ended up finding out that the ore body was characterized improperly, and they're operating between 0.6 and 0.8 grams per ton. Like on the low end, it's half. And so they spent $1 billion to build this plant over the course of 2 years. And another company, just for the sake of anonymity, but anybody who's in mining knows who this is, but for the sake of anonymity, one of Canada's mid-tier mining companies came in and bought that $1 billion plant for $365 million.
Oh.
Right? And so they've got a brand new plant,
a
brand new asset. They've got a 20-year mine life on it. They're willing to just let that ride a little bit because they bought it at a fraction of the cost.
Right.
And that's what happens more often than not in when it comes to juniors, right? So it's very difficult to point to any junior mining company in Canada who hasn't had cost overruns or hasn't had to dilute their shares to finish construction or like name any problem that can happen during a construction, right? It's just like building a house just on a larger scale. So any number of those issues that can come up, they do. And there hasn't been a successful mining project in 8 to 10 years in Canada.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult.
Well, you were saying that the low hanging fruit is pretty much gone at this point, or at least already owned.
Yeah.
So if you're looking to build a new mine and you're going to start from the ground up, you have to find your site.
Yeah.
And all of the ones that are almost guaranteed are owned.
Yeah. So, I mean, another really interesting concept, right? So when we talk about mining, what's low hanging fruit? Just for the sake of defining that, low hanging fruit means that you've got an ore body that's close enough to where you can build the infrastructure to actually separate the waste rock from the commodity, which means that you don't have to truck it very far, because trucking is the number one way to destroy your cost averages on a commodity, right? So you've got a commodity that's in an area where there's enough infrastructure that you can get power easily. The ore body doesn't have to be too far away from where you're going to develop the plant, and the ore body has a high grade. Like that's your sweet spot, right? But all the high grade commodities ore bodies are gone now. We've developed them all because since the beginning of time we didn't have extraction processes good enough to process a low grade. Grade being how many grams of something can you get per ton of dirt you're moving. Okay. Right. So as we develop more and more of these commodities, as we develop more mines, our ore body value or our ore body quality starts to go down. So we're now mining, like instead of 1.2 grams per ton, we're now mining 0.6 grams per ton at that mine site. Right. So your economics go way out the window. It's not a lot.
Yeah.
Your F-150 truck is rated to hold half a ton of dirt in the back bed.
Right.
Right? And so you would have, if we're talking 0.6 grams per ton, 0.3 grams of gold in one F-150 truck.
Yeah.
That's not a lot.
No.
It's not when you spent $1 billion to build the plant.
Yeah.
Now you have to, so what ends up happening is you have to start building higher ton mines, right? So again, it's just like the manufacturing, it's productivity, right? So if you can't do it for cheaper with the infrastructure that you have to do it more. You have to be more productive at doing it, more efficient at doing it. Right. And so the rock is what the rock is. Right. So that means that to be economical, you have to spend a little bit more money on the infrastructure to produce more of it. Or you have to have newer, more clever technology to recover more with the same infrastructure that you have. It's a lot simpler when you think about manufacturing. You have a 10,000 square foot shop and you are welding 10 chassis for vehicles a day in there. Right. And that we know how efficient that is because we've defined it, and there's got to be some type of a level of like actual return that you get on that. But if you could take the same square footage and manufacture 12, 14, 16 chassis with it, with minimal more dollar value input. So if you automate it, instead of people welding, you've got robots doing it. You're going to make more money with almost the same infrastructure. Right. Same thing. Right. So now we have to do higher tonnage with a relatively similar sized plant to be more economical.
Okay. Now, what kind of challenges so we talked about the monetary side of it. What kind of environmental challenges do we have opening mines in Canada, or not even necessarily environmental, but just
considerations?
Yeah. And the, like what kind of barriers do you run into? Because I know like getting a house, you have a permit, you got to get a permit to build a house. Same thing. Yeah. So like how intense are permits for mines?
It's pretty intense, to be honest. So Canada has one of the, if we use the word green, we have some of the most strict regulations for environmental permitting in the world, right? We almost set the gold standard for that. So there are some international councils and countries have signed up to say, yep, we'll follow those international boundaries on tailings, for example, which would be like your waste deposit into those large ponds that you hear failing here and there, right? But we have some of the strictest regulations. So an example of that, another gold mine, this one's out in the Maritimes, right where they wanted to build their open pit. So where the trucks are going down and filling up and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper as you're digging into the ground. Right where they wanted to build their open pit mine, it was a migration route for caribou in the area. Right. And so this delayed their permitting process by 6 to 8 months by one, I guess, cycle of this migration.
Okay.
Right? And so they would migrate and they'd reproduce and then they'd migrate back. And so however long that cycle is, let's call it like 6 months, right? So they migrate during the winter, they do their business, and then they migrate back during the summer when they're done their reproduction. And so what ended up having to happen is, and this is a silly example, but it really highlights the things that we have to go through in Canada in particular. Is they had to set up a boundary, a fence around the perimeter where this hole is going to be dug, where this pit's going to be dug. And they had to do this, and it had to be observed to prove that the caribou would hit the fence and figure out how to get around it to continue their migration cycle.
Oh man. Okay.
As if the government thinks that as the caribou approach and they see this big hole,
fall into a pit like the dodos,
like they're just going to be lemmings and fall off the edge, right? Like the noise from the trucks wouldn't have scared them off and disrupted them to begin with. So this is literally what happened. And so if you look at the oil sands, so the oil sands have most mines have tailings deposition, which means because you're taking dry rock, you're crushing it up, you're adding water and other liquids to it. So by the end, you have like a slurry that you have to deposit as waste. Yep. So you've removed all of your gold or your whatever it is, and your waste rock is going to be commingled with water, right? And so you end up having to send that to a pond, and it'll naturally seep out and de-water, and it'll stabilize over time doing that. So oil sands is no different. So the oil sands, they've got these large tailings ponds, and what ended up happening was migratory birds across Canada, Canadian geese, ended up seeing the pond and landing in it and getting covered in oil. Right, which is clearly terrible. Right.
Yeah.
And so, but I mean that hadn't happened before. So as soon as that happened, new regulations get put in place, and there's sonar all over these tailing ponds to let us know when the birds are migrating, and then they'll go out there and basically ensure that they're scared away and they're not landing. There's also frequencies that are set off so that the birds are disrupted and don't want to be near what that is.
Interesting.
They've set up scarecrows all through the ponds and the perimeters of it, which is like literally just, It's a stick, it's a cross, and it's got like an oil sands like PPE uniform hanging off of it, right? But they continue to evolve, and they continue to do so to protect the land that we have and the environment.
Okay.
But there's another side to the environmental side, right? There's another aspect, reclamation. So Canada's incredible at reclamation.
Okay.
The oil sands is our largest scale mining, so I'll reference that as well. Again, they're also the only mining industry in Canada, and likely globally, that are mandated on reclaiming the area that they've mined as they're in production. Most mines only have to do reclamation once they've closed down. Canada's oil sands, they actually have to fill the holes, plant the trees as they move from pit to pit to pit.
Oh.
Right? And so they have replaced thousands of hectares of forest land. And so there's actually, and it's all signed really well. I should have taken photos when I was there last week, but it's all signed really well. So as you're driving, they actually say that this forest that you see was mined in the 80s.
Oh, that's cool.
Right, and it's all been fully reclaimed, and that's the law. So you actually have to take a certain amount of money as a mining company, and you have to set it aside for reclamation at the end, so that you're not going bankrupt at the end of your mine life.
I see. Yeah.
And you're on the hook for making sure you do that. Whether or not you have enough to do it is different, but you're on the hook monetarily to do that, and they make sure that you set that aside so that you don't skimp out on your obligations.
Okay.
Right. So. And this I think the topic is a little bit later, but this actually brings up the question of like, why would we mine other places?
Yeah.
Like why would we invest our money into any company anywhere else in the world, right? Canada is by far the most responsible at developing our natural resources, maybe aside from some of the Scandinavian countries, where they really just don't have any anyways, right?
Yeah.
But we're so responsible in the way that we prove due diligence before digging in the ground. We're so responsible in our laws for how we have to do reclamation and make sure we bring it back to where it was, or whatever the equivalent is at the time.
Right.
That the fact that our government, and it really is our government for a long time now, wants to secure those resources globally, right? Like we want to go to the Philippines to get our copper, where there's no labor laws,
right,
and there's no safety. We want to go to Brazil, where the same problem. We've got tons of safety issues going on, right? We want to go to Mongolia to get our iron ore,
right?
Right? Like why is it not okay to be irresponsible in our own country, but that we'll accept that it's okay to get our resources from an irresponsible area,
right?
Right? If we've defined this as mandatory here, why doesn't it apply to how we import our commodities as well?
Yeah.
Right? It's asinine. We choose to get our oil from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Which we don't even have to discuss the issues there, the human rights issues that are happening there.
No, they don't even report the weather in the summer so that they don't have to abide by any labor laws.
100%.
Yeah.
Right? And so like the fact that we're willing to buy our oil and bring it in, and yet it's abysmal the amount of pollution we put into the air, developing our oil here, is just asinine.
Yeah.
It's craziness.
Yeah.
Any of OPEC for that matter. Right?
What's OPEC?
OPEC could be, so certain commodities are controlled by certain groups. OPEC controls oil, right? So you've got countries like Saudi Arabia. I'm not up to date on it. Qatar, Kuwait, Russia is a part of OPEC. And there's an OPEC Plus where it expands it out a little bit as well. But I mean, you've got these oligopolies or these organizations that control the output. How many barrels a day of oil go into the world?
Right.
And they control the price by doing that. But they're also the countries where like we're not responsibly doing this.
I see.
So why do we accept that?
Yeah. Well, we talked about it prior because, again, it's the cost for the consumer, right?
But okay, so look at the one. So there's two commodities where we don't accept that. We don't accept that with diamonds.
Yeah, diamonds.
Right? We don't accept that with diamonds. We're willing to spend more money for a rock on our hand to buy it in Canada or to have it lab grown, or to do it anywhere where it's responsibly done, right? And so blood diamonds were a really big thing.
Yeah.
But why don't we do that with all of our other commodities? It's like out of sight, out of mind, right?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people too, it's, you put gas in your car a couple times a week, whereas you buy a diamond hopefully once or maybe twice a year or in your lifetime.
Yeah.
Or, for a big purchase. So, but yeah, no, it was interesting that you said that because, we separate the morality from the finance side of it. So if it's like, if I can get it for less, I don't care about how it's being processed or how it's being extracted from the ground.
Exactly.
Which is a horrible way to think about it. And then it's like, if they're treating their people like that, how are they treating, the environment? What are they, what's their energy sources?
Dude, Oh yeah. I mean, like now you're talking about secondary, tertiary.
It's a huge bleed off. Yeah.
But I mean, like West Africa, there's like is massive for gold mining. Okay. A lot of their governments are also controlled by militaries. That flip flop. Who controls the military in that country controls the country. It's not a democracy. The people are completely repressed. Right. I mean, I have again, not naming sites or anything. I have a friend who's in the Canadian mining industry, and her husband was working in a mine in West Africa. He's a metallurgist, and the shift before he got there, the bus that takes you from your gated compound to the mine site, because it's too dangerous to live in just a regular house, was blown up by a tank 3 years ago.
A tank.
Yeah, the shift before he got there. Like this is what we accept, and like. Gold is an example that we think about when we wear jewelry, but it's also like one of the best resistors for electronics.
Yes, it's in a lot of electronics.
Tons of electronics, right? So it's got industrial use, but it behooves me why we accept it, like these commodities from anywhere else.
Yeah,
it's craziness. Cobalt, another great example. A year or two ago, it was found that these artisanal mines in Africa, and I'm not bashing on Africa, it's just low hanging fruit because you've got very loose to zero labor laws, right? And so these artisanal mines that were working on cobalt, artisanal meaning they're not using large trucks and machinery and all this stuff. It was found out that it was all child labor, right? And they were sending these children into underground mines. I mean, Africa at the time was the number one producer of cobalt, which is absolutely necessary for any battery that you make. They're trying to figure out other commodities to use, but like it is an essential ingredient.
Wow.
Right. And so we've got a couple of cobalt mines that have popped up in study phases in North America, but like this is literally what happens.
Yeah.
And if those weren't being subsidized in North America as a critical mineral, they wouldn't be developed.
Right.
The economics aren't there unless the government's pumping money into it.
Yeah, it's sad that we can just pawn it off onto somebody else's problem or as somebody else's problem and then just try and save a buck here and there, but then put so many lives through. Well, I mean, imagine being a 12-year-old working in a mine. I wouldn't want to be a 35-year-old working in a mine.
Yeah.
But how old I was there for a second.
Yeah. Well, especially like you don't have a respirator, so you're guaranteed to die of like lung disease or something.
Right.
It's like, at least we enforce, and like you're terminated from a company in Canada if you don't wear the proper PPE after warnings.
Wow.
It's like because there's a few different aspects to that. Number one, you don't want people dying.
No.
And for obvious reasons, less obvious being the liability on the company that's operating the mine. But like, you just want to get home. You want your people to get home safely.
Yeah.
Right. So like we've talked about labor laws. We've talked about like what people are paid, like the safety side of it. Like no respirators. You probably don't need like cut resistant gloves. You definitely don't need a hard hat. What's a steel toe boot?
I think it's just safety sandals.
Yeah, safety sandals. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, your toes will toughen up.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
So it's nuts to me. It's crazy.
That is crazy. Tell me about coal and why we need it so badly.
I mean, I honestly wouldn't even put coal into like the energy transition because the coal that we actually need is metallurgical. There's two types of coal.
Yes.
Two types of coal. So we've got thermal coal, which is what the world knows coal as.
Yep.
Put it in a big furnace, burn it, generate steam, spin a turbine, and then the pollution that comes out of that. But we also don't talk about how scrubbing technology for those stacks has made it so that there's almost zero emissions that come out of those coal power plants.
Would that be in China as well? Because I know that they have a massive amk of coal.
Likely not.
So
they don't have the environmental regulations.
No. Okay.
Right? And so it costs more money to put that technology on.
For sure.
Think like a catalytic converter for an underground vehicle.
Yep.
Right? You've got to scrub that out somehow. Also, number one ingredient in that is palladium, right?
Yep.
Which is a critical mineral.
Very expensive.
Very expensive. We have massive palladium production in Canada. So it's interesting. So coal. So we could likely accept removing thermal coal, although I think I think that gives developing nations a severe, or it provides a severe disadvantage to developing nations. Like there's a reason that the Industrial Revolution advanced North America so much, and Europe for that matter, and all of our current nations that we have globally that are considered like a first world or a developed nation, they all went through an industrial revolution of sorts.
Right.
Right. And in order to be able to afford an industrial revolution, you have to have affordable power.
Yes.
Right. And so if we starve the world of affordable power, how are places like India ever going to develop that might that we have as well?
Right.
Right. It's unfair. But I mean, from the other aspect is like we do have to protect our country. Right.
Well, just the world in general too. Right.
Yeah. Sorry. That's a better way to put it.
Yeah.
Carbon emissions don't have borders.
No, they don't.
Right?
There's wind. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like when we, like somebody who's against all the environmental stuff that we're doing, the argument there is like, why do we have to have such strict environmental regulations here when we're a net zero or actually a net negative producer of carbon emissions once you factor in all of our forestry?
Right.
Whereas China has nothing, and obviously it's just blowing over anyways.
Yes.
Right. So. But like park that because it's a silly and nuanced argument.
Yeah, that's something that's a cyclical. It can just go on and on and on.
100%. So I mean the need for clean power is there, but coal. So coal is we've talked about thermal coal, but the majority of the coal is strictly speaking about Canada that we produce here is metallurgical coal. It's used in steel production. How is it used? It's used as a flux in steel production. So it's used in when you're melting the metal. Iron ore. It's an additive to iron ore to be able to produce like sheets of steel.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's absolutely necessary. There is no way around it and no alternatives. Right?
Okay.
And I mean, when we look around, the majority of our world is made out of steel.
Yeah.
Right? And so none of that exists without thermal coal.
Okay.
Right? So it doesn't have the emissions effect that thermal coal does because we're not burning it and pumping it into the air. We're adding it for every single product that we want to have. I mean, like literally, like the little flip key on your fob is made out of steel.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't exist without it.
Right.
Your kitchen knives don't exist without it. And so we have to be able to separate the argument to say, okay, we've got one type of coal that we've defined as bad, and it is, and it's as we burn it, it's bad for the environment. But we've got another type of coal, which is Canada's primary coal resource. That is required for the energy transition. What are wind turbines made out of?
Metal.
Steel.
A lot of it.
How do we get more natural resources out of the ground? With steel trucks putting things into steel tanks and steel mills to break them up, make them smaller. And so like we've got this absolute dire need for coal, and yet we're being forced to divest out of it across almost all industries. That's starting to reverse right now, actually, which is really nice.
Oh, that's good.
A lot of these green funds or banks that were like, no, we need to diversify. We have to get on board with the energy transition. They're starting to realize what's actually required for the energy transition, and it's mining.
Yeah.
Right? So metallurgical coal is absolutely no way around it required until there's an alternative. Right? But I mean, I've got an infographic here, and I can never remember the stats. But like if we talk about the energy transition, and we just talk about battery demand, so critical minerals required for batteries, they'd require us to. This is done by a source called the Visual Capitalist, and they require us to build 293 new mines just to meet the current like wish for green energy transition. Right. So in other words, we would need to have our current supply of copper is 22.9 million tons a year. We would need an additional 3.7 million tons of that per year by 2030 to meet our needs. Lithium, current supply is 1.2 million tons. We need another 1.5. We need to more than double lithium production.
Right.
If we want to go by 2030, if we want to have the electric vehicles or the battery packs in our houses so that we can charge them on off-grid times and produce less emissions during the day, right? Graphite, currently produce 1.8 million tons. We need another 356,000. Manganese, we produce 90,000. We need another 319,000 tons a year.
Wow.
Right? Cobalt we spoke about. We need to double cobalt production. Nickel, we produce 3.6 million tons. We need another 1.4. And that all of these numbers are so the copper one where we're producing 22.9 million tons a year, that's if all copper production was dedicated to batteries.
Oh,
This is just for batteries.
that's just batteries.
This is just batteries. So we know that copper is being used in more than just batteries.
Anything that has
Your house is filled with it.
yeah, any piece of electronic has copper in it.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were flexing for the camera. I was like, that is
No.
just checking yourself out. Man. Yeah, you looking good, buddy. You looking buff.
Thanks,
Is that a newer T-shirt? It's still tight on the arms, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. I just washed it. It was in the dryer.
That's got to be it.
Yeah.
These they always fucking loosen up around the arms.
Is that W?
No, this is the ones that we like, the Only and Sons.
Yeah, I don't know.
Mine
I
always,
just had to go to Jack and Jones because Only Sons I couldn't find them last time I ordered.
yeah,
But it's the same T-shirt.
yeah, it's the exact same one. We're gonna make a better one
Cha.
coming soon. So our camera overheated and we had to jump,
And we're back.
and now we're back. So we're talking about copper being utilized in more than just batteries, and how there's,
Yeah.
if we took all of the copper that is being mined and used it for just batteries, we'd still have a deficit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty crazy that we have to produce so much extra, and that's only if we were to use it for batteries. We have such a massive deficit if we were only focusing our minerals to batteries.
100%. And all those stats are just based off of like the countries that have made a commitment to transition, right? So it's like the majority of the countries in the world haven't made commitments to energy transition and going green, right? So that's just those countries that have committed to it already,
Right.
right? So imagine the whole world comes online.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Then we're
It'd be
toast.
nuts.
Yeah. It's not sustainable at all. Okay. Interesting. So I guess trying to tie this back to the tariffs and whatnot, and I'm always trying to kind of bring our topic back to the economy, and specifically the Canadian economy. How is mining, why is mining so crucial to the Canadian economy?
So mining accounts for 10 to 12% of our country's GDP in its current state. It relates to 20% of the jobs in Canada, right? And so then, and that's before you start talking about some of the off spins, right? The manufacturing that supports the mining industry.
Right.
So it's absolutely massive. Like a fifth of our labor force is related to mining or the natural resources in some way.
Right.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's
Right.
huge.
So like that's the direct way that it influences. Right. It's also helping with foreign investment coming to Canada.
Right.
Right. So the investment of foreign money rather than the services sector where they're just recycling the money that's already inside the country. Right. So we're getting fresh development with it as well.
Okay.
And then those would be the two major ways that it's actually supporting our economy.
Okay. So yeah, it's crucial, right?
It's crucial.
And it's something that we need to ramp up, because if we can bump those numbers up from, you said 10% GDP?
Yeah, 10 to 12.
Yeah, 10 to
depending
12.
on the year.
If we can bump those up, that'd be huge.
It'd be massive.
Yeah.
I mean, but that takes a significant investment. It actually takes us prioritizing that natural resources sector from the government policy perspective.
Yeah, which I think these tariffs they're gonna help with.
I hope so.
Well, yeah, we hope so, because
Average time from finding, defining, and developing a resource in Canada is 9 to 10 years. Right? And so that's if you get the money. So this is just average time frames for because it takes a little bit of a while to drill out the resource. So literally drilling cores
Yep.
and measuring samples and inferring what's going to be under the ground based on what you've taken out of it so far. But the money is a big problem as well, right? Trying to get that foreign or trying to get any investment to develop them, because it's low returns over long time horizons, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars to build each one.
right. Would you say that it would be a wise investment for the Canadian government to make that financial investment into mines? Because if we're increasing our GDP from 10 to 12%, let's say we bump it up to 15 to even call it 20, if we really get it going, that immediately is a return. And then there's also the growth of the actual investment itself. Would it be wise for the Canadian government to start funding these mines, just like for, say, Ford, Mitsubishi actually investing in the mines directly?
Yeah, it definitely could be. I think that there's more productive ways for them to be able to actually help the mining industry, though,
Like what?
which would inspire that, like an increase in GDP. So I think that if we kept the same rigorous review process that we have, an environmental process that we have, but expedited it.
Right.
So if we develop more mines quicker, right? What that would end up doing is it would encourage. So now we would have a really positive and clear-cut way to develop a mine in Canada with a defined shortened time frame, which would inspire more investment.
Yep.
right? It would inspire more investment from the companies that are already doing mining. It would inspire more investment from foreign companies, or like a Mitsubishi, good example, investing into our resources. And in even any shareholder value, even on the retail investor side, you would have a path to a better return in a shorter time frame, which would encourage more money flowing into that industry.
Right. Okay.
I think that would be a more productive way of the Canadian government influencing the mining industry.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we pretty much nailed all of it. One thing I would like to ask, I know this isn't a financial podcast, it's not financial advice, so don't bet all on black if that's what we say, and then blame us when you lose it. But if you were to put money in a stock, would you look at gold? Would you look at silver, copper? I know you said lithium's tanked. Would that be a good time to get into lithium? What do you think a good placement would be in these minerals financially?
I think that there's different risk appetites. Yeah. So if I talk about myself personally, I have invested in juniors and I have invested in more mature mining companies as well. I tend to find myself trending more toward ETFs that follow different commodities now.
Okay.
And so I think that if you can follow along with an industry rather than an individual, of course the return is going to be a little bit less, but it's really, really difficult to pick a winner in mining.
Okay.
We talked about projects earlier and how while we do have a very strenuous way of how do we have to define a resource, people get it wrong too, right? And it ends up absolutely eating up all the value that you had in that stock.
Right.
So I think it's a better use of the average retail investor's time and money to invest in a commodity. And so if we talk about something like lithium, it's completely depressed right now. And so an investment into an ETF that tracks some of the largest countries or producers of lithium likely has nowhere to go but up.
Right.
Right. And so do you have to bet that one mine over another or one company over another is going to do well? No, you can bet on the commodity price.
Right. So yeah, you're diversify the portfolio.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And especially right now when there is a lot of development in mining and there's a lot of need for it, there's going to be a lot of juniors or like new mines that pop up, which have a high probability of not doing well in their first couple of years.
Right.
Right. So diversify over that. If you want to get into earlier stages, the government of Canada actually offers, it's almost like a bond, but it's a registered investment vehicle where there's only a certain amount of them that open up every year, and you put a pool of money, and the Canadian government uses that to fund exploration of new projects or resource definition within Canada. So your money's locked in for a certain amount of time. They usually guarantee a small percent increase from what you invested to then, or to whenever it matures. And of course, it can go higher than that. But it's also a write-off. So the exploration of metals and minerals is a write-off in Canada. And so that investment vehicle now becomes something that you're going to gain money on in a pretty safe way because it's diversified across a few different things. But it also becomes a write-off for the investor as well.
Very cool.
Yeah, I can't recall the name of that fund, but we can put it in the notes.
Yeah. Well. We'll find it and throw it in the notes. Okay.
Yeah, right. So I think that mining is risky, and mining takes a long time to actually realize a return.
Right.
If you wanted to go directly into an actual mining company, you'd likely want to go more blue chip. So there's different levels of mining companies. There's juniors where they're single asset owners. Mm-hmm. There's mid tiers where they've got a certain defined amount of production that they have or number of mines that they have, which is obviously a lower risk, but they've got more ways to go up.
Okay.
And then there's your senior miner companies or like the blue chips, right? And the growth on those is likely just going to be like a decent dividend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good information.
Yeah, it's tough though. Mining really does feel like gambling a lot of the time when you're investing into it. If you listen to like mining podcast shows, everybody's got a story of like a 10 bagger where they 10x their money, right?
Yeah,
but what they did is they get in really, really early. They get in while the resource is still being defined, and it's extremely risky.
Right.
And a lot of these people who talk about 10 baggers, like in Canada, there's a couple of different families who are very famous in the mining world, and they're extremely wealthy. And what they've done is they've invested very, very early. And now they've gone to the point where they can actually invest in ownership of the company, like a high enough asset allocation in that company where they're partial owners. And now they can influence how it's going.
Okay.
right? So I mean, obviously that's like 1% of people who are able to do that type of thing.
Yeah.
But really, like ETF is probably the best way to go, and you can even follow just if you strike commodities out of it. You can find ETFs through BMO and Vanguard that are strictly for junior mines. So all of the smallest things that are the highest risk, but diversified across all of them now.
Okay. So if one hits,
then you're going to have a higher bump than if one doesn't.
Right. Yeah. And then you lose everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool, man. Well, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it. That was good.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, it was.
That was fun. Yeah. We should do one with a couple of friends and maybe bring our faceless friend back in and.
Oh God! Just pure debauchery.
Yeah,
debauchery.
Debauchery.
Yeah.
And then unblur his face and kind of hint at who he is.
You're like, this is the guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, get him.
Yeah, seriously.
That'd be a terrible life choice, though. Yeah. Okay. Cool, man. Well, cheers.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that was fun.
See you, man.